This chapter has left me with so many questions, mostly with those first two pages revolving around Vivi and Big News Morgans, because how? Like, I get it. What happened on Egghead was big news. Even before the Navy got there, everyone had already heard the news that the Straw Hats had made it to the island, and the world government had spun things to make it seem as though the nefarious new Yonko Monkey D. Luffy was holding the world famous Dr. Vegapunk hostage. So, once his message began playing around the world, and he announced that it was due to his sudden death, obviously everyone who doesn't know the Straw Hats personally would jump to the conclusion that the Navy failed to save him and Luffy had killed Vegapunk. That much makes sense to me. That much I get. I understand how Morgan's got that information, but what's boggling my mind is how did he know about Law and Kid? Law's crew was taken out on some random uninhabited island in the middle of the ocean, and Kid's got wiped out on the coast of Elbaf, which, to my memory, is almost as isolated from the world as Wano is. So, how did he hear about either of those fights? Did Blackbeard call him up on his Dendemushi after Beppo and Law escaped, saying like, hey, Morgans, you're not gonna believe this. I just whooped the snot out of Law and the Hard Pirates. Is there a giant on Morgan's payroll to let him know all the embarrassing details about what happened to the Kid Pirates? I just need to know how he found out what happened to them. That being said though, I do understand why Morgans would consider what happened to them as big as the news about Luffy, because even though it was only Luffy that was promoted to a Yonko, the three of them are seen as the main factors for the raid on Onigashima, since they were the ones given credit for taking down Big Mom and Kaido. So hearing that after such a big win, they were so easily taken out would be a big deal. To use the NBA as an example, it would be like if the Atlanta Hawks beat the current champions, the Boston Celtics, for a spot in the finals in a 7-game stretch, only to be swept by the Dallas Mavericks. Some fans who know how the 2024 NBA Finals went are going to be very upset I compared Shanks and Blackbeard to the Mavs, which, fair enough, that might be a little harsh to compare them to that, but I think we can all agree that next to them, Kid and Law are definitely the Hawks. Now, we do have to throw some major respect to Vivi in the opening pages of this chapter, because even with Morgan threatening to expose her to the World Gov, she still stands strong and continuing to call him out on his BS. Especially when it comes to Luffy, which is some major Straw Hat energy, and she should have it considering she is an honorary member of the crew, and if I wasn't so sure that either Lilf or Bonnie were joining the crew by the end of Elbaf, I take this as Oda hinting at her reuniting with the crew very, very soon. But since I don't personally see that happening, I have to look at this from the other angle and consider the possibility that Morgans might actually sell her out to Emu. Well, obviously not Emu directly because I don't think he knows about them. Though, with how connected he is, honestly, I wouldn't put it past him to actually have some knowledge that there is someone who actually does sit on the empty throne. But anyway, with how much Emu seems to want Vivi for whatever reason, once Luffy and the crew are in a position to take the world government on directly, I can see Oda putting Vivi back in their clutches, especially if they need Vivi for a specific reason besides her strong resemblance to Lily, like say being connected to a possible ancient weapon. But that's a bridge we'll cross when and if we get to it. For now, we have to check in on the aftermath to this arc. Because we see, just like I expected, Kizaru did manage to not be knocked out by the Kagerasaki blast from 2 chapters ago, and he's seemingly physically fine, so realistically, if he wanted to, he could have stopped the Straw Hats from escaping the island. Or at the very least, he could have tried. But like I mentioned before in my last review, even if he did, more than likely Jinbei, Zoro, and Sanji would have worked together to stop him from stopping them, and it would have ended with one of them being left behind, preferably Jinbei. But regardless, even though he seems to be physically fine, emotionally is a completely different story. When I got to the double page spread, I could literally hear the silence in that opening scene. Nothing but the sounds of the waves crashing against the ship and Sentomaru paddling away after failing to protect the man he owed his life to, all while Kizaru silently watches from the ship. And keep in mind, the entire time Sakazuki is in the background calling through the Dendemushi for an update, but the scene was so somber that I almost completely ignored his text boxes until Kizaru picked up the call. That's how strong that scene was. Couple that with the montage of flashbacks showing Kizaru's first time meeting Vegapunk all the way up to when he killed him just hours before, and you can't help but feel the anger and guilt in his words when he finally breaks character to yell at Sakazuki for accusing him of slacking off. Which, to be fair to Sakazuki, is normally the case with Kizaru. He doesn't normally put his all into what he's doing. It just so happens that the one time he did, it was to kill the person closest to him. And that silent pause that Sakazuki took before apologizing tells me he knows exactly what Kizaru is going through in this moment. He more than likely had to make a similar decision during his time climbing up the ranks to Admiral, and it more than likely is what shaped his decision to put his all into the Marines and achieving his idea of absolute justice. Now the question is, how will this all end up affecting Kizaru? Man, I knew this was going to be sad because neither side is really walking away from this as the winner. Both the losses, some physical, some emotional, but Oda has made it clear that more than anyone, Kizaru is definitely portrayed as the biggest loser from this arc. Though if you look at the Straw Hats afterwards, you'd think it was Luffy. Because when we check in with the Straw Hats, they're honestly not much better off. Frankie, Zoro, and Jinbei are left alone on the Sunny, recounting the events. Nami, Sanji, Usopp, and Chopper are watching over an unconscious Lilith. Even Luffy, who normally would be partying it up in the aftermath to a big arc, is so down that he's not eating. Okay, well, he's not eating as much, but the point still stands that none of them feel like they should really be celebrating. Because when it comes down to it, there's no getting around the reality that ultimately they failed. They promised to get Vegapunk and all his good satellites off the island, but they only managed to save one. And they really only saved her because one of the others sacrificed themselves. In fact, if you really sit down and think about it, all the Vegapunks that died during this arc kind of died by sacrifice. Vegapunk, Pythagoras, and Shaka sacrificed themselves for the sake of their plan, although the three of them didn't know exactly what that plan was. And both Atlas and Edison sacrificed themselves in order to help the Straw Hats escape. Hell, even Emmett sacrificed himself to make sure that Luffy could get away. That is why this is hitting them so hard. Not only did they break their promise, which almost never happens with this crew, but they also survived due to everyone else dying for them. Now, after reading his dialogue, I'm interested in seeing what Zoro says in the official translation to this chapter, because what he says in the fan translation is a little harsh, but the message I think he's trying to send is still kind of true. Luffy's a Yonko now. These are the kind of battles they're going to have to deal with going forward. There's going to be people he wants to save that he just won't be able to, and he'll have to learn to accept that. It's a lesson I thought he learned all the way back when Ace died, but after all the wins he's had after the 2-year time skip, I guess he needs to relearn it. Though, even if he does, it won't stop him from feeling guilty about not being able to keep his promise. Luckily enough for him though, as Lilith wakes up in this chapter, she confirms something that I thought would happen back when we first saw Punk Records, and what they confirmed or hinted towards in the last chapter, that even if their bodies are dead, the personalities of each of the Vegapunks still exist, but is different from what I expected. Because we saw that Atlas had severed Lilith's access to Punk Records in order to trick York into thinking she died. So unless she was somehow reconnected while she was unconscious, that means that somehow, some way, each of them downloaded their personalities inside of her earpiece. Because while we can't hear it, we do see them giving her updates about what happened while she was out cold through her earpiece. All 5 of them existing inside her earpiece, not impossible for this group, but definitely not what I was expecting. And also a bit disappointing because I was really looking forward to the idea of the others slowly messing with York over time whenever she would try to use their brain to help the world government. Like maybe if she tries to invent a new weapon for them, they secretly give her the wrong ideas on how to improve it, and they ultimately end up making it worse. Or say down the line during the final arc, we get some Vegapunk on Vegapunk action, and during our battle, the other personalities take over and give Lilith the advantage during their fight. I don't know, it's just what I was personally looking forward to, but I'm also not upset by this development either, because this allows her to reassure Luffy and the others that they didn't actually fail. I mean, technically they really did, but this is enough for them to get out of their funk and get ready to party. So even though this chapter started off very somber, we do still get the usual end of arc feast. Luffy declares once again that he's going to become the Pirate King and find the One Piece, and everyone is having a great time. Though I gotta say the thing that caught my eye the most on that page was that small shot of Robin squeezing the life out of Chopper over the idea that she'll finally be able to meet Saul again. Also, I was going to be a bit disappointed because I thought we were going to go the entire chapter without seeing Bonnie, despite her being an integral part of the entire arc, but she is there in the background standing on Frankie's head cheering with the others. Anyway, all's good. The crew is off to their next adventure on Elbaf. We'll finally get to really explore the Land of Giants, see what kind of storyline Oda has cooked up for Usopp, but more importantly, we see as the chapter ends that there's seemingly some kind of man in shadow waiting for them to arrive on the island. And of course, I've already seen people online calling that this is going to end up being Shanks, which, no. Even if Shanks was still somehow on the island just waiting for Luffy and the crew to show up, this person's silhouette is completely different from his, so there's no way that this person is going to end up being Shanks. But if I was a betting man, I would put all my chips into this person being the burned scar man. It just makes so much sense for him to be here because there's not going to be too many arcs left in One Piece, and since he's the only one who knows where the poneglyph from Fishman Island is, we'll have to meet him eventually. Now, I'm not saying that the poneglyph is going to be on the island, just that he'll end up telling them where to find it, after doing some kind of like test or something like that to make sure that they're worthy of taking on the treasure. In fact, since Oda likes splitting up the crew so much, I'm predicting that in the next arc we'll have half the crew, led by Luffy, dealing with the Burnt Scar Man and trying to prove that they're worthy to find a One Piece, and the other half, led by Usopp, dealing with some kind of wacky adventure on the island, possibly having something to do with Prince Loki. But that's just my prediction. Let me know in the comments down below. Who do you think this mysterious character is at the end of the chapter? Is it Shanks or is it actually the burn scarred man? And what adventure awaits the crew on the land of giants?